In the serene town of Millbrook Falls, where artisan shops line cobblestone streets, a quaint candle shop draws customers with its warm glow and enchanting scents. Inside, Rose Blackwood crafts her delicate wares with practiced hands. Hands that once gripped steel instead of wax, hands that led the notorious Shadow Riders through the lawless territories of the western frontier. Now, as local thugs try to muscle in on her peaceful life, they're about to learn why even retired outlaws should never be underestimated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind carried the scent of cinnamon and cedar through the open door of Candlelight Haven, as Rose Blackwood arranged her latest creations in the storefront window. Her weathered hands, now soft from years of working with beeswax, moved with deliberate grace as she positioned each candle to catch the morning light. A decade of peaceful craft had almost erased the calluses from reins and revolvers, but some marks never truly fade. Through the antique glass panes, Rose observed Matthew Chen's general store across the street, where two men in expensive leather jackets loitered by the entrance. They'd been showing up more frequently over the past week, always watching, always making their presence known. The sight stirred something in her that she'd worked hard to bury, an instinct for reading threats, for noticing patterns. The bell above her door chimed as Sarah Miller, the town's librarian, entered with her usual warm smile. "Morning, Rose. Those new autumn scents are simply magical. How do you do it?" Rose returned the smile, pushing aside her unease. "Trade secret, my dear, though I might be persuaded to share over tea someday." Her voice carried the gentle lilt she'd cultivated over years of respectable small-town life, masking the sharp edge that once commanded dozens of loyal riders. As she wrapped Sarah's purchases in brown paper and twine, Rose caught another glimpse of movement outside. A third man had joined the others, this one wearing an expensive watch that caught the sunlight, their leader by the way the others deferred to him. 10 years of legitimate business hadn't dulled her ability to read hierarchy in body language. "Have you heard about the protection fees?" Sarah asked in a hushed voice as she counted out her money. "They're saying every shop on Main Street needs to pay now. Matthew tried to refuse last week and—" She glanced nervously at the men outside. Rose's fingers stilled on the cash register. Protection fees? From whom? They call themselves the Sterling Corporation. Showed up about a month ago talking about investing in local business development, but everyone knows what they really are. Sarah's voice dropped even lower. They broke all of Matthew's windows last night. He's already talking about selling. A familiar cold clarity settled in Rose's mind, one she hadn't felt since she'd buried her old life in a lockbox behind the loose brick in her cellar wall. "That seems rather unfortunate," she said mildly, though her eyes had sharpened as they tracked the men's movements outside. After Sarah left, Rose moved through her morning routine with practiced serenity. She trimmed wicks, poured new molds, and helped the occasional customer, all while her mind worked on a different level entirely. The Sterling Corporation. New players trying to establish territory through intimidation. In her previous life, she'd dealt with dozens of their kind. Mid-morning, the bell chimed again. The man with the expensive watch entered, flanked by his two associates. Up close, Rose could see the watch was a Patek Philippe. Real, not a knockoff. Old money backing new muscle. "Mrs. Blackwood." His smile was practiced, professional. "I'm Julian Sterling. I was hoping we could discuss some business opportunities." Rose wiped her hands on her apron, the picture of a simple craftswoman. "Of course. Would you like some tea? I just put on a fresh pot." The trick, she knew, was in the details. Small courtesies, steady hands, the appearance of complete harmlessness. "That's very kind, but this won't take long." Sterling gestured to one of his men, who placed a folder on the counter. "We're developing a business improvement initiative for Main Street. A modest monthly contribution ensures participation in our program's benefits." Rose opened the folder, noting how the larger of Sterling's men positioned himself near the door. Amateur move. He'd blocked his own escape route. "This seems very thorough," she said, paging through the documents, "though I'm just a simple candlemaker. All these numbers are rather beyond me." Sterling's smile tightened slightly. "It's quite straightforward, Mrs. Blackwood. $2,000 monthly ensures your shop's continued success and safety. We'd hate to see anything unfortunate happen to such a lovely establishment." Rose looked up, allowing just a flicker of fear to show in her expression. Let them think they had her cornered. Let them think she was just another easy mark. That's quite a sum for a small shop like mine. Consider it an investment in your future." Sterling's tone hardened. "We'll need your first payment by Friday. I'm sure a smart businesswoman like yourself will make the right decision." After they left, Rose locked the shop's door and flipped the "back in 15 minutes" sign. In her back office, she pulled out her ledger, not the one for candles and tax records, but a smaller, older book bound in worn leather. Worn. She hadn't opened it in years, but the names and numbers inside were still clear. Former contacts, old debts, resources she'd tucked away for a day she hoped would never come. Her fingers traced the final entry, dated 10 years ago, the day she'd walked away from the Shadow Riders, leaving behind a legacy of cunning and calculated violence. She'd chosen this town carefully, built her new life with meticulous attention to detail. The candle shop wasn't just a cover. She'd grown to love the craft, the peace it brought her, but as she watched Sterling's men through her window, now harassing the young couple who ran the bakery 2 doors down, Rose felt the old, familiar anger stirring. She'd left her past behind for good reasons, but she hadn't forgotten a single lesson learned in her outlaw days. Sometimes fire had to be fought with fire. And if there was one thing Rose Blackwood knew better than anyone, it was how to make things burn. That evening, after the last customer had gone, Rose descended into her cellar. Behind the loose brick, the lockbox waited. Inside lay the tools of her former trade, not just weapons, but ledgers, maps, and most importantly, a small black book of contacts. She'd maintained certain connections over the years, quiet arrangements that kept her informed of the wider world's movements. It was time to make some calls. The Sterling Corporation had chosen the wrong town, the wrong street, and most definitely the wrong candlemaker to threaten. Rose Blackwood hadn't led the Shadow Riders by being reckless or quick to violence. She'd succeeded through patience, planning, and understanding that true power lay in knowing when and how to strike. As she climbed the stairs back to her shop, the scent of lavender and vanilla mixed with something sharper, the metallic tang of approaching storm. Rose smiled, remembering how her old crew used to say that smell meant blood was coming. Perhaps they'd been right. The Sterling Corporation was about to learn a very expensive lesson about judging books by their covers, or in this case, judging a candlemaker by her gentle hands and quiet smile. Late that night, as Rose prepared new batches of wax for the next day's work, her phone buzzed with a message from an old contact. The news wasn't good. The Sterling Corporation had been systematically taking over small towns across 3 states, using the same pattern of intimidation and violence, but it was the name buried in the report that made her hands still. Victor. Kane. She remembered Kane from her Shadow Rider days, a ruthless enforcer who'd worked for several criminal organizations. Back then, he'd tried to muscle in on her territory twice. Both times, she'd sent him running with a lesson in humility. Now he was Sterling's head of security, which explained their aggressive tactics. Through her shop window, Rose watched the last lights going out along Main Street. The bakery's windows were still broken, hastily covered with plywood. Next door, the antique shop owned by elderly Mrs. Chen had a crude "for sale" sign posted. Another victim of Sterling's pressure, Rose moved to her workbench, where dozens of candles in various stages of completion waited. Her fingers traced the intricate patterns she'd carved into their surfaces, patterns that, to the right eyes, contained messages. It was an old shadow rider technique, one she'd adapted for her new life. Every candle she sold carried a small marking, invisible, unless you knew where to look. She picked up a deep red candle she'd been saving for a special occasion. The color reminded her of desert sunsets, of nights around campfires with her most trusted lieutenants. 10 years ago, she'd disbanded the Shadow Riders not out of weakness, but because she'd seen the changing times. Modern technology and law enforcement were making their type of operation increasingly difficult, but she hadn't just disappeared. She'd planned. Every town she'd considered for her new life had been carefully evaluated. Every contact she maintained had been chosen with purpose. Even this shop's location, at the intersection of Main Street and River Road, had strategic value she'd recognized long before Sterling's thugs arrived. A knock at her back door interrupted her thoughts. Through the security camera, she discreetly, installed years ago, Rose recognized Thomas Grant, Millbrook Falls Sheriff. She'd always been careful to maintain a cordial but distant relationship with law enforcement. "Evening, Rose," Grant said as she let him in. His face was drawn with worry. "Thought I should let you know. Sterling's men paid Matthew Chen another visit tonight. He's in the hospital." Rose's expression remained composed, though her mind was already calculating. How serious? Broken arm, concussion. They're calling it a robbery gone wrong, but... Grant shook his head. "I've got nothing solid to pin on them. These guys know how to work the system." "That must be very frustrating for you, Sheriff." Rose guided him to her small office, noting how his eyes lingered on her collection of antique brass scales. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thanks. Just..." He hesitated. "Be careful, Rose. These aren't ordinary thugs. There's something bigger behind them. Corporate lawyers, political connections. They're well protected. If he only knew." The irony of warning her about well-connected criminals. "I appreciate your concern," she said softly. "I'm sure everything will work out as it should." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After Grant left, Rose returned to her workbench. She selected specific candles, ones she'd been crafting for just such an occasion, and began packing them carefully in a box. Each one contained a different message, meant for different eyes. By tomorrow evening, they would be in the hands of people who remembered the Shadow Rider's leader not as a quiet candle maker, but as someone who'd outmaneuvered far more dangerous enemies than the Sterling Corporation. The timing would have to be perfect. Sterling's men would be watching, expecting resistance, looking for any sign of organized opposition. They'd be suspicious of outsiders, of obvious threats, but they'd never suspect that their undoing was being orchestrated by the gentle craftswoman who made such lovely scented candles for their wives' dining room tables. Rose smiled as she worked, her hands steady as she wrapped each candle in tissue paper. The smell of beeswax and essential oils filled the air, masking the metallic scent of the storm that was coming. Sterling and Kane thought they were the hunters, moving in on easy prey. They were about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that's learned to hide in plain sight. Dawn painted Millbrook Falls in shades of amber as delivery trucks rumbled down Main Street. Rose watched from her second-floor apartment above the shop as Sterling's men emerged from a sleek black SUV, beginning their morning rounds. Their confidence had grown. No longer just watching, but actively approaching shop owners, speaking in low voices while gesturing at windows and doors. Through her antique brass telescope, a relic from her outlaw days that still served her well, Rose observed details others might miss. The way the youngest enforcer's jacket bulged slightly at his hip, how they photographed each storefront with professional-grade cameras, the small earpieces they wore, coordinating with unseen others. A sharp rap at her back door interrupted her surveillance. Rose moved silently down the stairs, checking the security feed, before opening it to find Jamie Wong, her supplier of premium beeswax, looking nervously over his shoulder. "They followed me from the highway," Jamie whispered, wheeling in his delivery cart. "Asked questions at the last 3 stops, about you, specifically." Rose's expression remained neutral as she signed for the delivery. "What kind of questions?" "How long have you been a customer? Your ordering patterns?" Jamie hesitated. "They offered money for copies of your invoices. When I refused..." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing fresh bruises. "I see." Rose's voice carried just a hint of frost. "Would you like some tea, Jamie? I have a new blend that's quite soothing for inflammation." In her back office, while Jamie nursed his tea, Rose processed this development. Sterling's organization was doing more than just strong-arming local businesses. They were investigating her specifically, which meant either Kane remembered more than she'd calculated or someone else had recognized her. "There's something else," Jamie said, his voice low. "They're not just roughing up suppliers. 2 days ago, my cousin in Cedar Rapids, you remember, Mark? His whole warehouse burned down after he refused to cooperate with some corporate takeover. Insurance companies calling it an electrical failure, but..." Rose set down her teacup with deliberate care. Cedar Rapids. Another piece clicked into place. She'd been tracking Sterling's pattern of expansion through her old contacts, but this was the first confirmation of their methods. They weren't just taking over businesses, they were systematically destroying any infrastructure that could support resistance. "Thank you for telling me, Jamie." She opened a drawer in her antique desk, removing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have a special order for your mother. Please make sure she receives it personally." Jamie nodded, understanding the unspoken message. His mother had been one of Rose's most reliable information brokers in her Shadow Rider days, maintaining her network even after Rose's retirement. The package would contain more than just a fancy candle. After Jamie left, Rose began her morning routine with practiced precision. She opened the shop right on schedule, greeted her regular customers with her usual warm smile, and continued work on her seasonal displays. But beneath this peaceful facade, her mind was assembling puzzle pieces. Sterling's operation was far more sophisticated than initial appearances suggested. The careful documentation of businesses, the systematic targeting of supply chains, the strategic use of insurance-friendly accidents. This wasn't just a criminal enterprise. This was corporate warfare, using legitimate business as cover for something bigger. Through her shop window, Rose watched Sterling himself emerge from his SUV across the street. Today, he wore a bespoke suit that probably cost more than most local shops made in a month. He moved with the confidence of someone used to winning, someone who saw small-town shopkeepers as nothing more than pieces on a game board. A game board. Rose's hands stilled on the candle she was carving. That's what this was, a strategic takeover using multiple pressure points. Sterling wasn't just buying property, he was purchasing infrastructure. The hardware store's lumber yard, the bakery's delivery routes, the antique shop's storage facilities. The bell above her door chimed as Victor Kane himself walked in, flanked by 2 new enforcers she hadn't seen before. These ones moved differently. Military training, she guessed, noting their precise positioning. And situational awareness. "Mrs. Blackwood." Kane's voice carried the same gravelly threat she remembered from a decade ago, though his hair had grayed at the temples. "Your shop smells exactly like I imagined. Lavender and..." He paused, inhaling. "Is that sandalwood?" Cedar and sage, actually. Rose kept her tone pleasant, her posture relaxed. "Can I help you find something special? Perhaps a gift?" Kane smiled, but his eyes were cold as he studied her. "You remind me of someone I used to know, a woman who caused me quite a bit of trouble back in the day." "How interesting." Rose began arranging candles on a display shelf, letting him see her slightly. Trembling hands. "I've never been in much for trouble myself, just a simple shopkeeper." Simple shopkeepers usually don't have reinforced security doors installed in their back rooms. Kane moved closer, his bulk casting a shadow over her workspace, or specialized ventilation systems that could handle more than just candle smoke. Rose allowed a flicker of anxiety to show on her face. "The building is very old. The previous owner was quite paranoid about fire safety." The previous owner. Kane picked up one of her candles, examining it closely. Who, according to county records, never actually existed, just a paper trail leading nowhere. Now Rose let real fear show in her expression. Not because Kane was close to the truth, but because he was still missing vital pieces. Let him think he was closing in on something, while the real trap was being laid elsewhere. I don't understand." She stepped back, playing her role perfectly. "I just bought the shop when it was for sale. All the paperwork was handled by the real estate company." Kane set the candle down with exaggerated care. "Here's what's going to happen, Mrs. Blackwood. You're going to sell this shop to Sterling Corporation, at a very generous price, I might add. Then you're going to leave town. Tonight." But why? I'm no threat to you." Rose's voice quavered just enough to be convincing. "Because." Kane leaned in close, dropping all pretense. "I don't believe in coincidences. A woman with your particular skills setting up shop at the exact intersection of supply routes we need. That's not a chance." Rose backed away, letting him think he had her cornered. "Skills. I make candles, Mr. Kane. That's all." "We'll see." Kane straightened his jacket. "You have until midnight to accept our offer. After that..." He gestured to one of his men, who placed a small box on her counter. "Well, accidents happen in old buildings, with outdated wiring." After they left, Rose opened the box with steady hands. Inside was a single black rose, Kane's old calling card, from the days when he worked as an enforcer for hire. The message was clear. He might not be completely sure of her identity, but he wasn't taking chances. Rose locked the shop's door and flipped the sign to "Closed for lunch." In her back office, she activated a series of switches hidden behind an antique mirror. Security shutters silently slid into place over the windows. Air filtration systems hummed to life. And in the basement, behind a false wall of wine racks, emergency equipment powered up. She'd spent years preparing for the possibility of discovery, but Kane's appearance changed the timeline. He was dangerous not because of what he knew, but because of what he suspected. A man like that would keep digging, keep pushing, until he forced her to show her hand. Which meant she needed to change the game before he could set the rules. Rose reached for her phone, not the sleek smartphone she used for business, but an older model kept in a lead-lined case. It was time to call in some favors. The Shadow. Riders might have disbanded, but their network had never truly disappeared. As she dialed the first number, Rose smiled at the irony. Kane thought he was exposing her carefully constructed facade. In reality, he was providing exactly the opportunity she needed to dismantle Sterling's operation from the inside out. Sometimes the best way to hide a fire was to start a bigger one, somewhere else. Rose moved through her shop's hidden security center, a compact room concealed behind what appeared to be vintage storage cabinets. Multiple screens displayed feeds from cameras strategically placed throughout the neighborhood. She'd installed them gradually over the years, always under the guise of normal business upgrades or building maintenance. On one monitor, she watched. Kane's men setting up surveillance points of their own. Amateur work, she noted, too obvious in their positioning, but what caught her attention was the pattern of their placement. They weren't just watching her shop, they were establishing a perimeter around the entire block. Her encrypted phone buzzed with a message from another old contact. Highway Patrol reports 6 more SUVs heading your way. Corporate plates, heavy cargo. Rose's fingers flew across a specialized keyboard, pulling up property records for the surrounding area. Sterling's. Shell companies had already acquired 20% of Main Street's buildings, but the pattern wasn't random. They were creating choke points, controlling key access routes and utilities. A soft chime indicated movement at her back entrance. The camera showed Alice Chen, Matthew's teenage daughter, nervously glancing over her shoulder. Rose quickly, "Let her in through the shop's secure entrance. Dad wanted me to give you this," Alice whispered, handing over a crumpled receipt. Before they took him to the hospital, Rose smoothed out the paper. At first glance, it appeared to be a normal inventory list from Chen's general store, but Matthew had been one of her most reliable associates during her Shadow Rider days, and he hadn't forgotten their old codes. Hidden in the item numbers was a message. Kane brought a specialist team, checking property records back 15 years. "Thank you, Alice." Rose moved to her workbench and selected a special candle, deep blue with gold inlay. "Give this to your father. Tell him it's for good healing." After Alice left, Rose returned to her surveillance. Kane's investigation was moving faster than expected, which meant Sterling's operation was working on a tight timeline. But why? What was driving their urgency? She pulled up more data on her secure system. Sterling Corporation's pattern of takeovers had accelerated in the past month. Cedar Rapids, then Miller's Junction, now Millbrook Falls. Each town strategically located along major transport routes. A map on one of her screens highlighted the pattern. These weren't random targets. Sterling was creating a corridor, a chain, of controlled territories perfect for moving goods undetected. But the scale suggested something bigger than normal smuggling operations. The sound of breaking glass interrupted her analysis. Through the cameras, she watched Sterling's men systematically smashing windows along Main Street, not randomly, but in a calculated pattern designed to create panic. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a secure message from one of her former lieutenants, now working as a corporate security consultant. Sterling Corp just received major investment from overseas. Shell companies trace back to Advanced Defense Solutions. Advanced Defense Solutions. Rose remembered that name from her Shadow Rider days. They were arms dealers who specialized in cutting-edge military technology, always looking for secure routes to move prototype weapons. The pieces clicked together. Sterling wasn't just taking over small towns. He was building a sophisticated smuggling network disguised as legitimate business development. The property acquisitions, the supply chain control, the strategic locations. It was all infrastructure for moving illegal weapons, which meant Kane's interest in her wasn't just about old grudges. Her shop sat at a crucial intersection of their planned routes. If she refused to sell, she could disrupt their entire operation. Rose smiled as she began composing messages to her old network. Sterling and Kane thought they were the hunters, moving pieces into position for a hostile takeover. They had no idea they were actually placing all their resources exactly where she needed them to be. Let them think they had her cornered. Let them believe their show of force was working. By the time they realized the true nature of the trap, it would be far too late to escape it. After all, she hadn't survived as leader of the Shadow Riders by being predictable. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator is the one that lets itself appear to be prey, right up until the moment it strikes. Midnight approached Millbrook Falls like a gathering storm. Rose stood in her shop's darkened showroom, watching Sterling's men position themselves around the building. Their tactical formation was textbook corporate security, efficient but predictable. Through the window, she counted 6 new operators, joining Kane's original team, their movements suggesting private military training. Julian Sterling himself emerged from a Mercedes with diplomatic plates, adjusting his Italian silk tie as he surveyed the street. The casual display of wealth and power was carefully calculated, meant to emphasize the gap between his world and the small-town businesses he was systematically consuming. The burner phone in Rose's pocket vibrated, a message from her network. Advanced Defense Solutions CEO landed at private airstrip 20 miles out. Heavy security detail. So, the real players were finally showing themselves. Rose adjusted the dimmer switch, letting warm candlelight spill onto the sidewalk. A subtle invitation. Let them think they were choosing the time and place of this confrontation. Sterling's team did one final sweep before he approached her door. Rose noted their positions, their blind spots, the way they'd left the southwest corner of her building uncovered. Sloppy work. Kane should have known better. The bell chimed as Sterling entered, flanked by Kane and 2 new guards. Their shoes cost more than most local shops made in a week, but they moved with the practiced grace of professional killers. Mrs. Blackwood. Sterling's smile was practiced, perfect, the kind that never reached his eyes. I trust you've had time to consider our generous offer? Rose kept her hands visible on the counter, maintaining the appearance of a nervous shopkeeper. Mr. Sterling, I wasn't expecting such a late visit. Business opportunities don't always keep regular hours. He moved through her shop with calculated casualness, examining her displays. I must say, your work is exquisite. The attention to detail, the subtle variations in texture. He picked up one of her special order candles, the ones with hidden messages worked into their designs, almost like each one tells a story. You're very observant. Rose watched him handle her work, noting which pieces caught his attention. Most people don't notice the details. Kane stepped forward, his bulk casting shadows in the candlelight. Speaking of details, we've been doing some research on your background, Mrs. Blackwood. Fascinating reading. Oh? Rose let a tremor enter her voice. I'm just a simple craftsperson. Simple craftspeople don't usually have Swiss bank accounts. Sterling set down the candle with exaggerated care, or connections to certain organizations that operated in the Western Territories a decade ago. Rose's hand shook as she reached for a display piece, not from fear, but to draw their attention, away from the subtle movements of her other hand beneath the counter. I don't understand what you're implying. Let's be direct. Sterling's polite facade cracked slightly, revealing the predator beneath. We know who you are, or rather, who you were. The question is whether you're willing to be reasonable about this situation. One of the guards moved to block the shop's back entrance. The other maintained his position near the front door. Professional work, but they'd made a critical error in their positioning. Rose had designed this shop's layout specifically for moments like this. You seem to have me confused with someone else, Rose said softly, carefully maintaining her role. I'm just trying to run my small business in peace. Peace is a commodity, Sterling replied, his tone hardening. Like everything else, it has a price. In your case, that price is signing over your property and leaving town. Tonight. Rose allowed real emotion to show on her face. Not fear, but a flicker of the steel that had once made hardened criminals tremble at the mention of her name, just enough to make them wonder. And if I refuse? Kane stepped closer, looming over her. Then we stop being polite about it, starting with your supplier network. Jamie Wong, for instance. Tragic how many delivery drivers have accidents on those mountain roads. Or young Alice Chen, Sterling added smoothly. Such a bright future ahead of her. It would be a shame if something interrupted her college plans. Rose's fingers traced the edge of her counter, finding the hidden switch she'd installed years ago One press would activate certain security measures, but timing was crucial. Let them think they had her cornered. Let them reveal more of their plan. You're threatening children now. Her voice carried just a hint of its old authority. That seems beneath someone of your corporate stature. Sterling's eyes narrowed at her tone. Interesting choice of words from a simple candle maker. Almost reminds me of someone else. A certain leader who used to run operations in this region. The Shadow Riders, Kane growled. Ring any bells, Mrs. Blackwood? Rose maintained her confused expression, but her mind was racing. They knew more than they should, which meant someone had talked. Someone from her old life had made connections they shouldn't have made. I read about them in the papers sometimes, she said carefully. Terrible business, all that violence. Their leader was never caught, Sterling mused, studying her face. Fascinating woman by all accounts, brilliant strategist, had a particular talent for turning her enemies' strengths against them. He picked up another candle, examining its base. She disappeared about 10 years ago, right around the time you opened this shop, actually. Coincidences can be deceiving, Rose offered, letting them see a slight tremor in her hands. Indeed, Sterling's smile turned predatory. Just like it's probably a coincidence that your property sits at the exact intersection we need for our distribution network, or that your delivery routes overlap perfectly with our planned supply chain. Now they were getting to the heart of it. Rose watched Kane's men adjust their positions, preparing for what they thought would be the inevitable confrontation. I'm afraid I really don't understand any of this, she said, her voice quavering. I just make candles. No, Kane stepped forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. You're sitting on a crucial piece of infrastructure that we need for moving certain sensitive materials. The only question is whether you'll take the money and walk away, or whether we need to handle this the hard way. Rose pressed the hidden switch, feeling the subtle vibration as security systems activated behind her walls. The hard way? Property. Values plummet when buildings burn, Sterling said casually. Insurance companies are remarkably cooperative when the right pressure is applied. You could walk away with a generous settlement or, he gestured to Kane's men. Well, accidents happen in old buildings. Through her shop window, Rose noted additional teams taking positions across the street. They were preparing for resistance, but they'd miscalculated badly. They thought they were dealing with a retired outlaw trying to protect her cover. They had no idea they were walking into a trap a decade in the making. You seem very confident, Rose said softly, allowing steel to enter her voice. But confidence can be dangerous when you don't have all the information. Sterling's smile faltered slightly at her tone. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Is that a threat, Mrs. Blackwood? Not at all. Rose's hands were steady now, all pretense of fear gone. Just an observation from someone who's seen what happens when people overplay their hand. Kane moved forward, but Rose was already in motion. Her hand found the second switch under the counter, and the shop's lights went out. In the sudden darkness, only her candles provided illumination, carefully positioned to create disorienting shadows. Enough games, Kane growled, reaching for her, but his hand found empty air. Rose had already slipped into the shadows, moving with the silence of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of becoming invisible. Sterling's voice carried a new edge of concern. Secure the exits, now. But his men were already discovering that the shop's layout wasn't quite what it had appeared. Hidden panels had shifted, creating new passages while sealing others. The carefully arranged displays now served as obstacles, breaking up their planned containment formation. From the darkness, Rose's voice emerged, no longer that of a simple shopkeeper, but carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded the most feared outlaw gang in 3 territories. Gentlemen, she said softly, I believe we need to renegotiate the terms of this discussion. The message was clear. They had come believing themselves to be the predators, only to discover they were already trapped in the spider's web. And Rose. Blackwood was about to remind them why the Shadow Riders' leader had been legendary not for violence, but for turning the tables on those who thought they had the upper hand. Sterling's voice cut through the darkness, trying to maintain control. "This is unnecessary theatrics, Mrs. Blackwood. Whatever game you're playing, game." Rose's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like using advanced defense. Solutions to funnel experimental weapons through small-town America? Or perhaps you mean the game of threatening innocent people to build your smuggling network? Kane's sharp intake of breath confirmed her hit. "How did you? Your corporate shell games aren't as clever as you think." Rose moved silently through her shop's hidden passages. Digital trails, property records, shipping manifests, they all tell a story if you know how to read them. Through concealed observation ports, she watched Sterling's men fumbling in the shadows. Their tactical formation had completely broken down, their expensive training useless in an environment designed specifically to disorient. "Those candles you admired earlier," Rose continued, letting her voice drift. "Each one goes to a specific client, lawyers, judges, corporate executives. Amazing what people discuss in their homes when they think no one's listening." Sterling's composure cracked further. "You're bluffing. The Wong family's delivery network extends through 3 states. The Chen's storage facilities have connections to every major transport hub in the region. Did you really think it was a coincidence that all your strategic acquisition targets were linked?" A subtle click echoed through the shop as one of Sterling's men tried the front door, finding it sealed. Rose smiled in the darkness. The magnetic locks had engaged the moment she'd hit that first switch. "Your entire operation depends on controlling specific supply routes," she continued. "Routes that my people have been monitoring for years. Every truck driver, every warehouse worker, every small-town shopkeeper you've threatened, they all report to someone." Kane's voice betrayed growing unease. "The Shadow Riders disbanded a decade ago." "The gang disbanded," Rose corrected him. "The network simply went quiet, waiting, watching, building something far more valuable than a criminal empire." She pressed another hidden switch. Across the street, lights began flickering in supposedly empty buildings. Sterling's men outside suddenly found themselves exposed, their positions compromised. "Right now," Rose said softly, "your corporate accounts are being flagged for suspicious activity. Your shell companies are under investigation, and every piece of evidence about your weapons smuggling operation is being delivered to very interested parties." "That's impossible," Sterling snapped, but his voice wavered. "Our security is focused on external threats," Rose finished for him. "Not on the quiet woman who makes candles for your board members' wives, not on the local craftspeople you dismissed as irrelevant. That was your mistake, Mr. Sterling. You looked for an enemy wearing your kind of mask." Through her security feeds, Rose watched more figures emerging from the shadows outside. Not Sterling's men. These moved with the confident precision of federal tactical units, right on schedule. "You have one chance," Rose informed them, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Surrender now. Provide evidence against advanced defense solutions, and you might survive what's coming. Fight, and you'll discover why some legends are best left undisturbed." Sterling's next words died in his throat as federal agents began breaching his perimeter outside. The carefully constructed trap was springing shut, and he was finally realizing just how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. In the candlelight, Rose allowed herself to become visible again. Gone was all the pretense of the simple shopkeeper. Her stance, her expression, her entire bearing radiated the quiet power that had once made her name legendary in the criminal underworld. "Your choice, gentlemen," she said softly. "But choose quickly. The candles are burning down, and I'd hate for anyone to be caught in the dark." The implied threat wasn't lost on them. In the flickering shadows, surrounded by federal agents and a decade's worth of carefully laid plans, Sterling and Kane were learning a lesson that many had learned before them. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator is the one that's learned to hide in plain sight, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The dawn after Sterling's confrontation brought new tensions to Millbrook Falls. Federal agents maintained discreet surveillance positions throughout Main Street, while Sterling's remaining operatives scrambled to contain their unraveling operation. But it was the arrival of a pristine black Bentley at the edge of town that caught Rose's attention. Through her network of observers, she'd traced the vehicle's path from a private airstrip 40 miles north. The driver's credentials matched those used by Advanced Defense Solutions' elite security team, which meant the real players were finally making their move. In her shop's hidden command center, Rose studied surveillance feeds while processing new intelligence from her network. The Bentley's passenger hadn't shown his face, but she'd caught a glimpse of a familiar signet ring. Marcus Bishop, Advanced Defense Solutions Chief of Special Projects, had decided to handle the situation personally. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Jamie Wong. 3 more trucks diverted from regular routes. Cargo manifest scrubbed. They're moving something big. Rose cross-referenced the diverted shipment data with satellite imagery her network had acquired. Sterling's operation wasn't just moving weapons. They were systematically positioning components for something larger, something that required specialized handling and multiple secure assembly points. A knock at her back door interrupted her analysis. Through the security feed, she recognized Thomas Harrison, a retired federal marshal who'd been investigating Advanced Defense Solutions for years. She'd arranged his retirement to Millbrook Falls specifically for this moment. "You're playing a dangerous game, Rose," Harrison said as she let him in through the secure entrance. "Bishop doesn't just eliminate problems, he erases them completely, along with anyone connected to them." Rose guided him to her command center, where multiple screens displayed the evolving situation. "Tell me about Project Eclipse." Harrison's expression tightened. "Where did you hear that name?" Sterling's organization isn't just building a smuggling network. They're creating infrastructure for something specific. Rose pulled up shipping manifests on one of her screens. These component specifications match classified military prototype designs. Advanced Defense Solutions has been developing under Pentagon contracts. If you know about Eclipse, Harrison studied the data with growing concern, then you know why the Bishop can't afford any witnesses. The prototype alone would revolutionize modern warfare. In the wrong hands, it's not about the weapon. Rose highlighted patterns in the shipping data. It's about proving the concept. Once they demonstrate a successful underground distribution network, they can sell the system to the highest bidder. Instant, untraceable supply chains for anyone. With enough money. Harrison absorbed this with a grim expression. That's why they're targeting specific towns, creating a proof-of-concept corridor, and eliminate anyone who might expose their operation. Rose brought up profiles of recent accidents along Sterling's acquisition routes, but they made a critical mistake here in Millbrook Falls. Besides threatening a legendary outlaw in her own territory, Rose's smile carried no warmth. They revealed their timeline. Bishop's arrival means they're ready to move the final components, which means another encrypted message flashed on her screen, this one from Alice Chen. "Dad overheard Sterling's men at the hospital. Something about convergence tomorrow night." Rose's fingers flew across her keyboard, correlating data points. They're not just moving components. They're about to demonstrate the entire system for potential buyers. Harrison leaned closer to the screens. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've been feeding them exactly the intelligence they need." Rose brought up a map showing Sterling's acquired properties. every piece of information about local security, patrol patterns, surveillance blind spots, all carefully crafted to guide them towards specific routes. Understanding dawned in Harrison's eyes. "You've been setting this up since before they arrived?" Sterling thinks he corrupted local law enforcement. In reality, every compromised officer is part of a task force I helped establish years ago. Rose highlighted key positions on the map. "We've been building our own network right alongside theirs, watching, waiting for them to commit fully to the operation." A new alert flashed on her screen. Satellite imagery showed multiple vehicles converging on a warehouse complex 30 miles outside town. Rose recognized the location, an abandoned industrial site that perfectly matched Sterling's operational requirements. "They're staging for the demonstration," she noted, checking timestamps. Bishop wouldn't risk exposure unless the buyers were already committed, which means, Harrison finished her thought, high-level players are already in position. Rose activated a secure communication channel, sending coded signals to her network. Time to spring the trap. But first, she turned to Harrison with a calculating expression. "Tell me everything you know about Bishop's security protocols." As Harrison detailed Advanced Defense Solutions' tactical procedures, Rose's mind was already assembling the pieces. Bishop's arrival had accelerated her timeline, but it also presented an opportunity. The bigger the demonstration, the more evidence they could gather. The more buyers present, the more complete their exposure would be. Through her shop window, Rose watched Sterling's remaining men attempting to maintain their cover of legitimate business development. They had no idea they were already surrounded. Not just by federal agents, but by an invisible network of seemingly ordinary townspeople who'd been positioned for exactly this moment. Her phone buzzed again. Jamie Wong had spotted familiar faces at local hotels, private security specialists known to work for foreign military interests. The buyers were arriving early, eager to witness Sterling's demonstration of their untraceable distribution network. "This goes deeper than weapons smuggling," Harrison mused, studying the intelligence feeds. "With a system like this, they could move anything: people, information, technology. Exactly why it needs to be exposed completely." Rose began typing instructions to her network, not just stopped, but documented so thoroughly that no one else tries to replicate it. A shadow passed her window, the Bentley making another circuit of Main Street. Bishop was examining his battlefield, unaware that every move was being monitored, every position noted, every potential escape route already compromised. Rose allowed herself a small smile as she activated the next phase of her operation. Sterling and his corporate enforcers had thought themselves clever, using legitimate business as cover for their criminal enterprise. But they'd never understood the true lesson of the Shadow Riders. Real power didn't come from violence or intimidation. It came from patience, from building networks so subtle that even those within them didn't realize their true purpose until the moment of revelation. As the sun climbed higher over Millbrook Falls, Rose Blackwood, former outlaw queen, turned, watchful guardian, prepared to demonstrate just how completely her opponents had underestimated the quiet candlemaker in their midst. The storm was about to break, and when it did, the true nature of both hunter and prey would finally be revealed. She reached for a specially prepared candle on her workbench, one designed to burn with a distinctive blue flame. When placed in her shop window, it would signal her network that the final phase was beginning. Everything that followed would depend on precise timing and absolute coordination. Bishop and his corporate masters were about to learn why the Shadow Riders had been legendary, not for their strength, but for their ability to turn an enemy's own power against them. And this time Rose intended to ensure the lesson would never be forgotten. Harrison leaned closer to one of the monitors, pointing to a pattern in the data. "Look at these shipping routes. They're not just moving components, they're transporting Specialized teams, engineers, technicians, assembly crews, Rose confirmed, pulling up personnel files her network had gathered. Each group carefully compartmentalized, none knowing the full scope of the project. She highlighted specific transfers, but noticed the pattern of their movements. The retired marshal studied the display. They're creating redundancy, multiple assembly points, each capable of completing the final product. Insurance against interference. Rose brought up architectural plans for several warehouses along Sterling's acquisition route. If one site is compromised, they can still complete the demonstration at another. But that's not the interesting part. She overlaid the assembly site, locations with local property records. Every facility was owned by a different shell company, each with its own seemingly legitimate business purpose. But when viewed together, a clear pattern emerged. These aren't just assembly points, Harrison realized. They're demonstration sites. Each one is configured to show different aspects of the distribution system. Rose nodded. Some buyers are interested in weapons movement. Others want to see how the network handles personnel trafficking, data transfer, biological materials. Her expression hardened. They're not selling a single product. They're selling the entire infrastructure. Her secure phone chimed with another update from her network. Alice Chen had overheard more details at the hospital. Sterling's men were preparing documentation for potential investors, complete with case studies of their successful takeovers in other towns. That's why Bishop came personally, Harrison mused. This isn't just another weapons deal. It's the culmination of years of development and the beginning of something worse. Rose accessed a hidden database, revealing connections her network had mapped over the past decade. Advanced Defense Solutions isn't the only player. Look at the investor profiles. Harrison's eyes widened as he scanned the data. Private military contractors, intelligence agencies, criminal syndicates, they're all connected. Because they all want the same thing, a proven system for moving sensitive materials without detection. Rose highlighted specific transactions. Sterling's operation is just the proof of concept. Once it's demonstrated successfully, every criminal organization and shadow government agency in the world will want to replicate it. Rose's screens suddenly lit up with new alerts. Her network was detecting increased activity at multiple sites along Sterling's transport corridor. Through surveillance feeds, they watched teams of technicians being escorted into secure facilities. They're starting final preparations, she noted, checking timestamps, which means the demonstration is imminent. Harrison gestured to one of the feeds. Those security teams, they're using Advanced Defense Solutions' latest protocols, the ones that haven't even been officially released yet. Because this operation has full corporate backing. Rose pulled up personnel files. Every security officer, every technical specialist, every local enforcer, they're all officially employed by legitimate subsidiaries. Plausible deniability, Harrison growled. If anything goes wrong, the local operators take the fall while the corporate structure remains intact. Rose's voice carried a cold edge. It's why they chose small towns for their trial run, easier to control the narrative when things go wrong. She brought up profiles of recent accidents along Sterling's acquisition routes. Factory fires, vehicle crashes, seemingly random incidents that had eliminated potential witnesses and cleared the way for property acquisition. But their own precautions created a vulnerability, Rose continued, highlighting pattern anomalies. They're so focused on maintaining their corporate cover that they've become predictable. Every action has to fit their legitimate business narrative. Harrison studied the data with growing understanding, which means their response options are limited. They can't risk actions that would expose their true nature. Exactly. Rose began typing instructions to her network. They've built a cage of their own legitimacy, and now another alert flashed across her screens. Satellite imagery showed multiple high-end vehicles arriving at local airfields. Private jets with diplomatic markings, corporate helicopters, unmarked transport planes. The buyers are moving into position, Harrison noted, checking the timestamps. Once they're committed, they become part of the evidence. Rose's smile was predatory. Every handshake, every transaction, every demonstration of their illegal network, all documented and ready for release. Through her shop window, she watched Sterling's men conducting another patrol of Main Street, maintaining their facade of corporate security. In the growing morning light, more business consultants were arriving, buyers and investors preparing to witness the demonstration of a system they hoped to replicate for their own dark purposes. None of them realized that every movement was being tracked, every conversation recorded, every piece of evidence carefully catalogued by a network that had spent years preparing for this moment. Rose reached for another specially prepared candle, this one deeper blue than the first. When placed beside it in the window, it would signal the second phase of her operation, the beginning of a sequence that would expose not just Sterling's operation, but the entire shadow network that had enabled it. "They think they're creating something unprecedented," she told Harrison quietly, "but they've forgotten the most important lesson from the old days." "Which is?" Rose's expression carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "The most effective trap isn't the one that catches its prey. It's the one that makes them expose themselves willingly, thinking they're the ones in control." As if to emphasize her point, the Bentley made another pass by her shop. Bishop was still conducting his surveillance, still believing he was the hunter assessing his ground. He had no idea he was actually the final piece positioning itself in a trap that had been waiting patiently for precisely this moment. As twilight settled over Millbrook Falls, the town's transformation became more apparent. Black SUVs with tinted windows patrolled the streets while teams of corporate consultants conducted final security sweeps. To the casual observer, it might have appeared that Sterling's organization had achieved total control. But Rose Blackwood saw the truth through. Her network of observers, every display of power, every security measure, every calculated intimidation, all of it revealed crucial information about their operations structure and vulnerabilities. In her shop's hidden command center, she studied live feeds from multiple surveillance points. Marcus Bishop's Bentley had taken up position outside the Grand Mesa Hotel, where several potential buyers were gathering for what was officially listed as a regional business development conference. "Guest list just updated," Harrison reported, scanning diplomatic arrivals. "Representatives from 7 different private military contractors, plus several unnamed investment consultants with interesting travel histories." Rose cross-referenced the new arrivals with her database: Russian private security, Israeli tech developers, Chinese industrial interests. She highlighted specific profiles, all with connections to Advanced Defense Solutions' previous weapons programs. Her secure phone buzzed with an update from Jamie Wong. "Cargo manifests changing in real time. They're scrubbing records faster than usual, because the demonstration timeline has accelerated." Rose brought up shipping schedules on her main screen. Bishop's presence pushed them to move early. They're worried about exposure. Through the security feeds, they watched Sterling's men escorting technical teams into position around town. Each group carried specialized equipment cases, tools for the final assembly phase of whatever prototype they planned to demonstrate. "Look at their formation," Harrison noted. 3-man teams, each with different security protocols. "They're compartmentalizing knowledge even within their own operation." Rose nodded, noting details that others might miss. "The technicians' badges have color-coded strips, different clearance levels for different aspects of the project." She highlighted specific individuals, but watch their behavior patterns. On screen, one of the technical teams paused to consult documentation before entering a secure area. Rose froze the frame, zooming in on their tablet display. "There," she pointed, Assembly sequences. They're not just building one prototype, they're preparing multiple demonstration scenarios. Harrison leaned closer. Makes sense. Different buyers will want to see different capabilities, weapons transport, personnel movement, data transfer. But it creates operational weakness. Rose began typing instructions to her network. Each demonstration scenario requires its own security protocols, its own technical team, its own support structure. More moving parts means more potential, failure points, and more opportunities for documentation. Rose activated a series of commands, and new data streams appeared on her screens. Every technical team, every security detail, every corporate representative, they're all generating evidence. Her network was already in motion. Surveillance cameras captured faces and interactions. Digital systems logged communications. Financial transactions were tracked and recorded. Every piece of Sterling's operation was being documented from multiple angles. A knock at her back door interrupted their analysis. The security feed showed Alice Chen, looking more nervous than usual. "Dad's heard more," Alice reported once inside. "Sterling's men are talking about some kind of systems test tonight. They're clearing specific traffic routes through town." Rose checked her map overlays. The designated routes created a pattern, multiple paths converging on key points around Millbrook Falls. They're not just testing their distribution network, she realized. They're demonstrating how it integrates with existing infrastructure, roads, communications, power systems. Harrison saw it too. Complete urban control. Take over a town's infrastructure, and you can move anything without detection, which is why they need my property. Rose highlighted her shop's location on the map. It's not just about the physical space. It's about network connections, power. Lines, data cables, water mains, everything intersects here. She brought up architectural plans for her building and the surrounding area. What appeared to be a simple storefront actually sat at the junction of multiple utility systems. "Sterling thinks he's found a strategic weakness in my position," she noted, allowing herself a small smile. "He has no idea why I chose this location a decade ago." Her screens lit up with new alerts. Bishop's security teams were establishing a perimeter around the hotel, where potential buyers were gathering. Their formation was professional, thorough, and completely predictable. "They're following Advanced Defense Solutions standard protocols," Harrison observed. "The same ones they use for official military demonstrations, because that's how they're selling this, as a legitimate security infrastructure project." Rose's fingers flew across her keyboard, coordinating with her network. "Their entire operation depends on maintaining that corporate facade." Through the shop window, they watched Sterling himself emerge from a black SUV, now dressed in an impeccable business suit. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed they had total control of their environment. The shop's bell chimed. As Kane entered, flanked by two new security officers, their bearing suggested special forces training, but their eyes betrayed uncertainty. Something about the quiet candlemaker's demeanor had them on edge. "Mrs. Blackwood." Kane's attempt at casual menace fell flat. "Mr. Sterling requires your presence at tonight's business conference to discuss your property's integration into our development plans." Rose maintained her role as the nervous shopkeeper, but her mind was already calculating angles and opportunities. "I'm not sure I understand." "Oh, I think you do." Kane moved closer, trying to loom threateningly. "Certain interested parties want to see exactly how our acquisition process handles resistant elements." Through hidden cameras, Rose watched more of Sterling's security teams taking up positions around her shop. They were preparing for what they thought would be a demonstration of their power over a stubborn local business owner. In reality, they were positioning themselves exactly where she needed them to be. "Very well," she said quietly, allowing a tremor of fear to enter her voice. "Let me close up the shop first." As she moved to the window to adjust her display, Rose placed one final candle among her carefully arranged creations. This one was deep crimson, carved with patterns that meant nothing to the untrained eye, but to her network it was a signal. The final pieces were in position. The trap was ready to be sprung. Kane's men escorted her to a waiting vehicle, maintaining their professional demeanor. They thought they were shepherding a helpless shopkeeper to witness their operation's triumph. They had no idea they were actually delivering the architect of their destruction exactly where she needed to be. In the gathering darkness, Millbrook Falls hummed with hidden tension. Sterling's organization had spent months building their shadow infrastructure, preparing to demonstrate its power to potential buyers. But beneath the surface, a different network had spent years preparing for this moment. And Rose Blackwood was about to remind everyone why the Shadow Riders' leader had been legendary not for brute force, but for turning an enemy's own strength into their ultimate weakness. As Kane's men guided her toward the waiting SUV, Rose noted every detail of their security formation, the way they positioned themselves, their communication patterns, the subtle signs of their specialized training. But more importantly, she noted what they missed. They failed to notice Jamie Wong's delivery. Truck passing by for the third time in an hour, each circuit providing updated surveillance of Sterling's positions. They overlooked Alice Chen, photographing their vehicles from the diner across the street, documenting license plates and security configurations. Most crucially, they missed the pattern of signals being passed through seemingly innocent civilian activities. A shopkeeper adjusting their window display, a maintenance worker checking streetlights, a jogger paused to retie their shoes. Each action conveyed specific information to Rose's network. Through the SUV's tinted windows, Rose watched Millbrook Falls transform. Sterling's organization had spent months establishing their cover as corporate developers, but they'd never understood the true nature of small-town relationships. Every shopkeeper they'd threatened, every local business they'd tried to intimidate, all had become parts of a web they never noticed being woven around them. The vehicle turned onto Main Street, passing the Grand Mesa Hotel, where Bishop's security teams maintained their perimeter. Rose observed their positioning with professional interest. Their formation was textbook Advanced Defense Solutions Protocol, which made it perfectly predictable. Impressive. "Operation you have here," she commented mildly, playing her role as the intimidated local merchant. "All this security for a business conference." Kane's grunt carried a hint of pride. Mr. Sterling believes in thorough preparation, especially when dealing with high-value clients. "I imagine they're quite particular about their privacy," Rose probed carefully. "All these foreign investors and military contractors." Kane's sharp look confirmed her intelligence was accurate. "You seem well informed for a candle maker." "Oh, you hear things," Rose deflected with practiced ease. "Working late in my shop. People talking outside. Amazing what folks discuss when they think no one's listening." Through concealed cameras she'd positioned months ago, Rose watched Bishop himself emerge from the hotel. His expression carried the controlled urgency of someone operating on a strict timeline. Her hidden earpiece crackled with an update from Harrison. "Satellite shows more vehicles incoming. Private jets landing at 3 different airfields." Rose made a show of nervous fidgeting, using the movement to activate a transmitter hidden in her watch. The signal would alert her network that the final phase was beginning. The SUV pulled into the hotel's underground parking garage, where more of Sterling's security teams waited. Their formation suggested they were prepared for potential resistance. But their positioning revealed gaps that Rose had spent years learning to exploit. "Mr. Sterling is waiting in the conference room," Kane announced as they escorted her from the vehicle. "I trust you'll be cooperative." Rose allowed herself to stumble slightly, prompting one of the guards to grab her arm. The moment of contact gave her the opportunity to plant a microscopic tracking device on his sleeve. "I'm just a simple businesswoman," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't understand what all this is about." But she understood perfectly. Through hidden cameras and carefully positioned observers, she watched Sterling's operation falling into its final configuration. Technical teams completing their preparations, security forces establishing containment zones, corporate representatives arriving for the demonstration. They thought they were arranging all the pieces for their triumph. In reality, they were positioning themselves perfectly for their own exposure. Rose's network was already documenting everything, every face, every vehicle, every piece of equipment, all captured from multiple angles. The evidence would be irrefutable. As they led her toward the elevator, Rose caught glimpses of other guests arriving. Arms dealers trying to look like legitimate businessmen, private military contractors masquerading as security consultants, intelligence agents operating under diplomatic cover. All of them are drawn here by the promise of accessing a system that could move weapons, personnel, and sensitive materials without detection. None of them realized they were walking into a trap, a decade in the making. The elevator doors closed, and Rose felt the familiar calm that always preceded decisive action. Sterling's organization had spent months building their shadow infrastructure, preparing to demonstrate its power to potential buyers. But they'd failed to understand the most crucial lesson from her Shadow Rider days. True power doesn't come from the strength you show, but from the strength you keep hidden until the perfect moment to strike. And that moment was finally at hand. The Grand Mesa Hotel's top floor had been transformed into a corporate command center. As Rose stepped out of the elevator flanked by Kane's security detail, she observed the careful choreography of Sterling's operation. Technical specialists huddled over advanced monitoring equipment while corporate representatives prepared presentation materials for potential buyers. Marcus Bishop stood at the center of it all, his tailored suit and commanding presence drawing attention. But Rose's trained eye caught the subtle signs of strain beneath his polished exterior, the barely noticeable tension in his shoulders, the way his hand occasionally brushed the secure phone in his pocket. "Mrs. Blackwood," Sterling approached, with practiced charm, though his eyes remained cold. "Thank you for joining us. I trust the escort was comfortable." Before Rose could respond, Bishop cut in sharply. "Is this necessary, Julian? Having a local shopkeeper present during sensitive negotiations seems unwise." "On the contrary." Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Our potential partners specifically requested a demonstration of how we handle infrastructure acquisition in resistant communities." Rose maintained her facade of nervous uncertainty, but her mind was already processing crucial details. The room's layout, security positions, the sophisticated communications array humming in the corner. Through her concealed earpiece, Harrison's voice provided updates. "Satellite shows 3 more vehicles approaching from the north. Diplomatic plates matching known arms dealer signatures." Bishop moved to a large display screen showing a map of Millbrook Falls. Red dots indicated properties already under Sterling's control, creating a web of strategic positions throughout the town. "As you can see," he addressed the assembled buyers, "our acquisition process is methodical and comprehensive. Each property serves a specific function in the network, allowing for seamless movement of sensitive materials." Rose noted how carefully he avoided explicit mentions of weapons or military technology. Everything was couched in corporate euphemisms: infrastructure development, strategic acquisition, resource optimization. A sudden commotion at the door drew attention. One of Sterling's technical specialists rushed in, his face tight with concern. "Sir, we're detecting anomalous signals across multiple frequencies." Bishop's expression hardened. "Explain." "Encrypted communications we can't identify. They're not following any known protocol." "Local law enforcement?" Sterling suggested. The technician shook his head. More sophisticated. The pattern suggests military-grade encryption, but it's not match any recognized signature. Rose kept her expression neutral, but inwardly she smiled. Her network was making its presence known, letting Sterling's organization detect just enough activity to make them nervous. "Sweep everything," Bishop ordered. "I want full spectrum analysis of all. Communications in a 10-mile radius." Kane's grip on Rose's arm tightened slightly. "Should we delay the demonstration?" "No." Bishop's tone was final. "Our buyers are already committed. We proceed as planned." Through the room's windows, Rose watched more vehicles arriving. Luxury. Cars with diplomatic plates. Unmarked vans carrying technical equipment. Each new arrival represented another player being drawn into her trap. Sterling turned to address the assembled buyers. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you'll witness the future of secure logistics, a completely autonomous network capable of moving any cargo without detection. And what guarantees do we have of its effectiveness?" One of the buyers spoke up, a woman whose accent suggested Eastern European military connections. "An excellent question." Sterling gestured to the technical display. "Tonight's demonstration will showcase every aspect of the system: secure transport routes, automated security protocols, real-time tracking with complete deniability." Rose noticed Bishop checking his phone again, his frown deepening. More anomalous signals were appearing, creating patterns that his security teams couldn't decipher. "Mrs. Blackwood's property," Sterling continued, highlighting her shop's location on the map, "represents the final piece we need. Its position at key infrastructure junctions makes it essential for full network integration." "And if she continues to resist?" another buyer asked. This one with the bearing of private military leadership. Sterling's smile turned predatory. "That's part of tonight's demonstration. Sometimes acquiring crucial assets requires decisive action." Rose allowed real fear to show on her face, knowing they would misinterpret its cause. Let them think she was intimidated by their threats. Let them believe they had her cornered. Through her hidden earpiece, Harrison's voice carried urgent news. Multiple thermal signatures detected at the warehouse sites. "They're powering up something big." Bishop moved to the communications array, studying readouts. "All teams, report status." The responses came in quick succession. Technical teams in position, security perimeters established, transportation routes cleared. But Rose noted the increasing tension in their voices. Something wasn't going according to plan. Sterling addressed his audience again. "If you'll direct your attention to the main display, we'll begin with an overview of the network's core capabilities." The lights dimmed as presentation screens activated. Rose used the moment of darkness to press a concealed button on her watch, sending a signal to her network. The real demonstration was about to begin. Suddenly the hotel's power flickered. Emergency generators kicked in immediately, but the interruption had disrupted Sterling's carefully orchestrated presentation. "Just a local grid fluctuation," he assured the buyers, but Rose saw Bishop's expression darken. "Sir," one of the technical specialists called out, "we're detecting more anomalous signals. They're everywhere." The room's atmosphere shifted subtly. The buyers, all experienced operators in their own fields, sensed something wasn't right. Years of survival instincts were telling them that beneath the corporate veneer, a trap was being sprung. Bishop moved to the window, studying the town below. Emergency lights cast strange shadows, creating an atmosphere of uncertain threat. "Julian," he said quietly, "I'm getting reports of unusual activity at all our secure sites. Multiple security breaches, but no visible intruders." Sterling maintained his composure, but Rose saw the first cracks appearing in his confident facade. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. Our security teams are investigating these minor technical issues." Through hidden cameras she'd positioned months ago, Rose watched her network's coordinated actions taking effect. Each security breach, each communication anomaly, each power fluctuation, all carefully designed to create mounting pressure on Sterling's operation. The technical specialist's voice carried barely controlled panic. "Sir, we're losing control of the system. Someone's accessing our secure networks." Bishop spun to face Rose, sudden understanding dawning in his eyes. But before he could speak, all hell broke loose. Every screen in the room suddenly displayed the same image, a stylized Black Rose, the old symbol of the Shadow Riders. And in that moment of revelation, Sterling's carefully constructed operation began to unravel. The trap hadn't just been sprung, it had been wrapped around them so gradually, so carefully, that they never noticed until it was far too late to escape. Impossible. Bishop breathed, staring at the Black Rose symbol. The Shadow Riders were disbanded years ago. Were they? Rose's voice had changed, dropping all pretense of the nervous shopkeeper. Or did they simply become something else, something harder to detect? Sterling's composure cracked as he finally recognized the quiet strength in her bearing. It was you all along. Through her hidden earpiece, Harrison provided updates on the chaos unfolding across town. All Sterling's security positions are compromised. Their communications are completely exposed. On the main display, the Black Rose dissolved into streams of data, financial records, communications logs, detailed documentation of Sterling's entire weapons smuggling operation. "What have you done?" Bishop demanded, his practiced corporate authority giving way to genuine alarm. "Created a demonstration of my own." Rose moved with fluid grace, all trace of fear gone. "Though not quite the one you planned to show your buyers." The assembled corporate representatives and arms dealers shifted uneasily, years of survival instinct warning them that something had gone terribly wrong. Through the windows, they could see lights flickering across town as Rose's network systematically dismantled Sterling's control. "Sir," one of the technical specialists called out, "we're detecting federal tactical teams moving into position. Multiple agencies, coordinated approach patterns." Bishop's phone buzzed with urgent messages. "The other demonstration sites, they're all compromised. Every secure facility, every transport route, your entire shadow infrastructure," Rose confirmed calmly. "All documented and exposed, along with everyone connected to it." Sterling made a move toward the communications array, but Rose's voice stopped him. "I wouldn't. Those systems aren't under your control anymore. Haven't been for some time." The technical displays showed the full scope of infiltration. Rose's network hadn't just breached their security. They'd been inside it from the beginning, documenting every aspect of the operation. "You see," Rose addressed the shocked audience, "while you were building your smuggling network, I was creating something far more subtle. A web of ordinary people, shopkeepers, delivery drivers, local officials, all working together to expose corruption." Through her concealed cameras, she watched federal teams taking control of Sterling's warehouse facilities. Each site contained evidence of weapons smuggling, each piece carefully documented and preserved. "The Shadow Riders didn't disappear," she continued, allowing her true authority to show. "We evolved, became something that couldn't be fought with guns or bought with money." Bishop's security teams were coming apart, their carefully planned protocols useless against an enemy they couldn't see. Years of military training meant nothing when facing a network that operated through trust and community rather than force. "Your entire operation," Rose explained, "depended on people being afraid, on believing that money and violence could control everything." She smiled coldly. "That was your fundamental mistake." Sterling's phone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from his field teams. Every escape route was blocked. Every fallback position was compromised. Every contingency plan rendered useless. "Mrs. Blackwood," one of the buyers spoke up, a woman with the sharp eyes of an intelligence operative, Or should I say, Ghost Rider? Rose inclined her head slightly, acknowledging her old title. A name I haven't used in years, though its meaning has changed somewhat. Through the windows, they could see more federal vehicles arriving. But these weren't standard tactical teams. These were specialized units, assembled specifically to handle international arms dealers and corporate criminals. You don't understand what you've done, Bishop warned, his corporate mask cracking further. The people behind this operation, they don't allow failure. Oh, I understand perfectly. Rose's smile carried decades of earned wisdom. Why do you think I spent 10 years preparing, building evidence, creating networks, positioning pieces, all while you thought I was just making candles? The room's atmosphere had shifted completely. The buyers were now looking at Rose with new understanding, and in many cases, growing fear. They recognized in her the kind of patient, methodical power that made her predecessor organization legendary. Sterling made one last attempt to salvage the situation. Whatever evidence you think you have is already being transmitted to every major law enforcement and intelligence agency worldwide, Rose cut him off, along with proof of who really backs your operation. The shadow companies, the political connections, the military contracts used as cover. Through her earpiece, Harrison confirmed, all data packets delivered, multiple agencies acknowledging receipt. They're moving in. Bishop's phone buzzed one final time. His face went pale as he read the message. They're burning everything, trying to erase all traces. Too late, Rose said softly. Far too late. The truth doesn't burn as easily as it used to. The hotel's power fluctuated again, but this time it wasn't an accident. Rose's network was systematically shutting down Sterling's escape options, herding them exactly where she needed them to be. In that moment of growing chaos, as federal teams closed in and corporate criminals realized they'd been outmaneuvered, Rose Blackwood stood calmly in the center of it all. She wasn't just a retired outlaw who had outsmarted her enemies. "Ma'am," one of Bishop's security officers reported, "we're detecting organized movement patterns throughout the town. They're herding our teams into containment zones." Rose nodded approvingly. Mrs. Chen's Tai Chi group, 20 retired Special Forces operators who've been practicing crowd control techniques, disguised as morning exercise. The revelation hit Bishop hard. Every aspect of small-town life he'd dismissed as irrelevant had been carefully orchestrated. Every local business they'd threatened had been part of a larger design. The delivery routes, he muttered, pieces finally clicking into place. Wong's distribution network extends through 3 states, Rose confirmed. Every driver is trained in counter-surveillance. Every warehouse is equipped with hidden documentation systems. We didn't just watch you build your smuggling network, we helped you design it, guided you toward the routes we could monitor, the facilities we could access. Sterling's phone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from his field teams. Their escape routes weren't just blocked. They had been systematically designed to fail from the beginning. "Sir," another technical specialist called out, "we're detecting data breaches at all primary facilities. Everything's being copied and transmitted to multiple federal agencies." "Not just federal," Rose corrected. "Every major law enforcement and intelligence organization worldwide is receiving proof of your operation. The weapons smuggling, the corporate corruption, the political bribes, all of it documented and verified." Through her earpiece, Harrison provided updates. Interpol teams moving into position, multiple jurisdictions coordinating response. The hotel's power flickered again, but this time the emergency generators didn't engage. In the momentary darkness, Rose's network executed another coordinated sequence. When the lights returned, the room's dynamics had shifted subtly. Sterling's security teams found themselves isolated, their positions compromised by the very defensive protocols they'd established. You see, Rose explained to the increasingly nervous audience, while you were building a system to move weapons, we were creating something far more powerful, a network of people dedicated to exposing corruption, protecting their communities, and you used our own plans against us, Bishop concluded, professional respect mixing with growing dread. Every security measure we implemented became another tool for documenting your crimes, Rose finished. Every background check you ran on local businesses told us what you were looking for. Every security camera you installed gave us another angle for gathering evidence. Through the windows, more federal vehicles arrived, but these weren't standard tactical teams. These were specialized units designed to handle international criminal organizations. Your mistake, Rose continued, was thinking that power only flows one way, that fear and money could control everything. She gestured to the chaos unfolding outside. But real strength comes from trust, from people choosing to stand together against those who would prey on their communities. Sterling made one last attempt to regain control. Whatever evidence you think you have is being verified by every major intelligence agency right now. Rose cut him off. Your corporate facades, your political connections, your military contracts, all exposed, along with everyone who helped build this operation. The buyers were now looking at their surroundings with new understanding. What they'd thought was a simple corporate takeover of a small town had actually been an elaborate trap, years in the making. Bishop's phone buzzed one final time. His expression confirmed what Rose already knew. Their shadow backers were trying to erase all traces of involvement. Too late, she said softly. The truth is already out there, spreading through networks you never even knew existed. Community by community, town by town, people are learning to stand up to organizations like yours. Through her hidden cameras, Rose watched federal teams systematically securing Sterling's facilities. But the real victory wasn't in the arrests or the exposed smuggling operation. It was in the revelation of a new kind of power, one built not on fear or force, but on the quiet strength of ordinary people working together to protect what mattered most. The Shadow Riders hadn't just evolved. They had transformed into something their enemies could never truly fight. Because how do you combat an opponent that exists in every friendly greeting, every shared moment, every small act of community solidarity? Sterling and his organization had tried to build a shadow network for moving weapons. Instead, they'd helped reveal something far more powerful, a network of light built by people who had learned to fight darkness, not with violence but with trust, patience, and unwavering determination. You still haven't grasped the full scope, Rose noted, watching Bishop's security teams try to re-establish control. Look closer at your technical readouts. What do you really see? The specialists studied their displays with growing dismay. What they'd thought were system malfunctions were actually carefully orchestrated patterns, each disruption serving multiple purposes. The power fluctuations, one technician realized, they're not just disrupting our communications, they're creating a map, Rose finished. Every surge, every dimming, all revealing different aspects of your hidden infrastructure. The very systems you built to stay invisible are now making you impossible to miss. Through her concealed earpiece, Harrison provided new intel. Advanced. Defense Solutions Board of Directors is in emergency session. Their stock is already dropping as the first hints of exposure hit financial markets. Bishop's phone buzzed again, this time with messages from corporate headquarters. His face paled as he read them. They're implementing scorched earth protocols, trying to sever all connections, which only confirms their involvement, Rose pointed out. Every attempt to hide evidence becomes proof of guilt. Your own security systems are documenting their panic. The assembled buyers watched their carefully constructed world crumble. Years of operating in shadows, using corporate legitimacy as cover, all of it exposed by a network they'd never seen coming. The gardening club, one of Sterling's men muttered. The book club at the library. The morning coffee group at the diner. How many are there in this town? Rose allowed herself a small smile. Almost everyone, each playing their part, gathering information, watching for signs of corruption. But Millbrook Falls isn't unique. She gestured to the technical displays, showing communication patterns spreading across the region. Every small town you targeted, every community you tried to intimidate, they're all connected now, all sharing information, supporting each other. Impossible, Sterling breathed. The resources required, the coordination, are nothing compared to the strength of people protecting their homes, Rose countered. You thought small towns were easy targets because they lack corporate security, but they have something far more valuable, genuine human connections. Through hidden cameras, she watched her network's final movements falling into place. The local theater group, actually a team of former intelligence operatives, coordinating civilian evacuation routes. The high school computer club, staffed by retired cyber warfare specialists, systematically dismantled Sterling's digital security. Sir, another specialist called out, we're detecting unusual patterns in civilian communications, social media, text messages, even dating apps. They're all being used to coordinate resistance, Rose confirmed. Every platform you overlooked, every channel you dismissed as irrelevant, all part of a larger communication network. Bishop's security training finally let him see the full picture. The candles weren't just for sending messages. They were mapping devices, among other things, Rose acknowledged. Each one is carefully crafted to gather specific types of data. Temperature variations, airflow patterns, electronic emissions, all helping us understand how your operation really worked. Sterling's phone displayed another series of urgent messages. More corporate partners are desperately trying to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. The foundation of your power was always an illusion, Rose continued. You thought controlling infrastructure meant controlling communities. But real infrastructure isn't just roads and buildings. It's the connections between people. Through her earpiece, Harrison reported, multiple corporate boards initiating emergency protocols, law firms dropping clients, politicians suddenly reviewing certain relationships. The hotel's power fluctuated one final time, but now everyone understood its true purpose. Each disruption was a signal, coordinating different aspects of Rose's network as they systematically dismantled Sterling's operation. You built a smuggling network disguised as legitimate business, Rose explained to the increasingly desperate audience. We built something far more resilient, a community of people dedicated to protecting each other, sharing information, standing together against corruption. Bishop's phone displayed one last message before going dark. The expression on his face confirmed what Rose already knew. Their corporate masters were cutting all ties, trying to salvage what they could from the wreckage. They'll deny everything, Sterling said quietly. Use their money and influence to bury the truth. No. Rose's voice carried absolute certainty. Because the evidence isn't just in computer files or official documents. It's in the stories people will tell, the connections they've made, the understanding that they're not alone in fighting organizations like yours. Through hidden cameras, she watched federal teams systematically securing every aspect of Sterling's operation. But the real victory was already spreading far beyond Millbrook Falls. In communities across the country, people were learning that resistance wasn't about violence or force. It was about patience, observation, and the quiet strength that comes from standing together against those who would rule through fear. The Shadow Riders hadn't just evolved into a new kind of network. They'd become a template for something their enemies could never truly defeat: the power of ordinary people, who had learned to see through corporate facades and stand up to corruption, one small town at a time. The night air crackled with tension as Advanced Defense Solutions corporate response teams arrived at the Grand Mesa Hotel. Their unmarked vehicles moved with military precision, deploying teams of specialists equipped with the latest tactical gear. Bishop's expression showed the first hint of hope as elite operators took up strategic positions. But Rose noted what they didn't see: how local residents adjusted their movements in response, how seemingly random civilian activities created patterns that channeled the corporate teams exactly where her network wanted them. "Final containment protocols authorized," Bishop announced, his corporate authority reasserting itself. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm afraid you've underestimated our resources." Through her concealed earpiece, Harrison's voice carried a note of urgency. "Advanced Defense Solutions has activated their black site teams, multiple extraction specialists incoming." Rose maintained her calm demeanor, watching the corporate teams coordinate their movements. Their tactics were professional, their equipment state-of-the-art, but they were fighting the last war, using strategies that belonged to a world of shadows and force. "Tell me, Mr. Bishop," she asked quietly, "did you ever wonder why your technical teams never detected any suspicious signals from my shop? Why did your most sophisticated scanning equipment find nothing unusual?" Before he could respond, one of his specialists called out in alarm. "Sir, we're getting weird readings from civilian communications, text messages, social media, even credit card transactions," Rose finished for him. "Every purchase at my shop, every delivery route, every seemingly innocent business interaction, all carrying hidden data, not in encrypted signals, but in patterns of normal activity." Sterling's face showed dawning comprehension. The candles, the different scents, the seasonal variations. Each one designed to gather specific types of information, Rose confirmed. Temperature variations in secure rooms, airflow patterns in restricted areas, electronic emissions from classified equipment, all collected by corporate wives and executives who thought they were just buying luxury items. Through hidden cameras, she watched Advanced Defense Solutions teams establishing their containment grid. Their formation was textbook perfect, which made it perfectly predictable. "You're trapped," Bishop stated flatly. "This building is now locked down by some of the best security specialists in the world." "Am I?" Rose's smile carried decades of earned wisdom. "Look again at your tactical display. What do you actually control?" The technical specialists studied their readouts with growing concern. What had appeared to be successful containment was actually herding their own teams into precisely calculated positions. The civilian movements, one operator realized, they're not random, they're creating channels, Rose explained. Directing. Your force is exactly where we need them. Every panicked shopper, every confused tourist, every delivery vehicle, all part of a coordinated pattern. Harrison's voice provided updates. Corporate extraction teams hitting resistance at every turn. Local traffic patterns, construction detours, even weather conditions. Everything's working against them. Bishop's phone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from his superiors. Advanced Defense Solutions stock was in freefall as hints of the scandal reached financial markets. Your corporate masters are getting nervous, Rose observed. They know what exposure like this means. Not just legal consequences, but complete loss of deniability. Every classified contract, every government connection. You can't prove anything, Sterling interrupted, but his voice lacked conviction. Bishop's phone displayed one last message before going dark. The expression on his face confirmed what Rose already knew. Their corporate masters were cutting all ties, trying to salvage what they could from the wreckage. But it was too late. The evidence was already spreading through networks they'd never even known existed. Community by community, town by town, people were learning to see through corporate facades and stand up to corruption. The Shadow Riders hadn't just evolved. They'd become something their enemies could never truly defeat. Because how do you fight an opponent that exists in every friendly greeting, every shared moment, every small act of community solidarity? Don't need to. Rose gestured to the chaos unfolding outside. Your own systems are doing that for us. Every attempt to contain the situation, every corporate response, all generating more evidence of guilt. Through the hotel's windows, they watched more corporate response teams arriving. But something was wrong with their deployment pattern. Their movements seemed sluggish, uncoordinated. Having trouble with your tactical communications? Rose asked mildly. Amazing how unreliable technology becomes when an entire town's infrastructure is working against you. Bishop's security teams reported growing problems, radio frequencies filled with interference, GPS signals showing conflicting data. Even their secure phones were behaving erratically. What did you do? Bishop demanded. Nothing. That wasn't already possible with your own systems. Rose's voice carried quiet authority. We just helped you build exactly the kind of infrastructure you wanted, one that could be completely controlled. You just never asked who would end up with that control. The technical displays showed the full scope of their predicament. Every security system, every communication channel, every piece of surveillance equipment, all compromised not by hacking or force, but by careful manipulation of their own protocols. Sir, one of the corporate specialists reported, we're detecting organized resistance at all extraction points, local law enforcement, civilian groups, even the entire community, Rose finished. Every person you threatened, every business you tried to intimidate, all working together to expose your operation. Through her hidden cameras, she watched advanced defense solutions teams struggling against an invisible opponent. Their military training was useless against a network that operated through ordinary civilian activities. The morning coffee group at the diner, Bishop realized, the book club at the library, the local theater group. How many are there? In this town, almost everyone. Rose allowed herself a small smile. Each playing their part, gathering information, coordinating responses. But Millbrook Falls isn't unique. She gestured to the technical displays, showing communication patterns spreading across the region. Every small town you targeted, every community you tried to control, they're all connected now. All sharing information, supporting each other. Sterling's phone displayed another series of urgent messages. Corporate partners are desperately trying to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. You built a system for moving weapons, Rose continued. We built something far more powerful, a network of communities dedicated to protecting each other, sharing information, standing together against corruption. Through her earpiece, Harrison reported new developments. Multiple corporate boards initiating emergency protocols, law firms dropping clients, politicians suddenly reviewing certain relationships. The hotel's power fluctuated again, but this time everyone understood its true purpose. Each disruption was a signal, coordinating different aspects of Rose's network as they systematically dismantled advanced defense solutions response. Your mistake, Rose explained to the increasingly desperate audience, was thinking that power only flows one way. That corporate authority and military force could control everything. She gestured to the chaos unfolding outside. But real strength comes from trust, from people choosing to stand together against those who would prey on their communities. Advanced defense solutions had tried to build a system for controlling communities through force and fear. Instead, they'd helped reveal something far more powerful. A network of light, built by people who had learned to fight darkness, not with violence, but with patience, trust, and unwavering determination. "Security breach at Site 3, one of Bishop's specialists called out suddenly. "The prototype! It's been compromised." Bishop moved quickly to the communications array. "Status report, now." "The safeguards we installed," the specialist explained, his voice shaking. "They're not just failing, they're actively working against us. Every security protocol is being turned into a documentation system." Rose watched their growing panic with calm satisfaction. "Did you really think those local contractors who installed your security systems were just simple technicians? Every camera, every sensor, every piece of surveillance equipment, all carefully modified to serve a different purpose." Through her hidden earpiece, Harrison provided new details. "Technical teams recovering data from all secure sites. The evidence goes deeper than we thought. International connections, black market deals." "It's not possible," Sterling muttered. "The firewalls, the encryption, were designed exactly to your specifications," Rose pointed out, "which meant we knew every weakness, every backdoor, every potential failure point. Your own paranoia created the perfect documentation system." The technical displays showed cascading failures across Advanced Defense Solutions network. Each security measure they'd implemented was being systematically transformed into evidence of their crimes. "Sir," another specialist reported, "we're detecting organized movement patterns in all target zones. The civilian populations, they're not running away from our teams." "No," Rose confirmed, "they're containing them. Every neighborhood watch group, every business association, every community organization, all working together to isolate your forces." Bishop's phone buzzed with updates from his field commanders. Corporate response teams found themselves trapped in carefully orchestrated traffic patterns. Tactical units were being channeled into dead ends by seemingly random civilian activities. The construction detours, Bishop realized, the road maintenance, the utility work. "All carefully planned and timed," Rose explained. "Every infrastructure, project positioned to create choke points we could activate when needed. Your own assessment teams approved the work, never realizing its true purpose." Through hidden cameras, she watched Advanced Defense Solutions' elite operators struggling against an invisible network that seemed to anticipate their every move. Their military training and advanced equipment meant nothing against a community that had turned itself into a sophisticated trap. "Final containment protocols failed," the lead specialist announced. "We're losing control of all secure facilities." "You never had control," Rose corrected quietly. "You just had the illusion of it. Every system you built, every security measure you implemented, all designed to fail in exactly this way." Sterling's phone displayed yet another series of urgent messages, corporate lawyers initiating emergency protocols, financial partners freezing assets, political allies suddenly unreachable. "The prototype alone is worth billions," Bishop argued desperately. "The technology, the research is already being exposed worldwide," Rose finished for him. "Every technical specification, every classified capability, every potential military application, all documented and verified by your own security systems." Harrison's voice carried news of further developments. Federal task force moving to secure all Advanced Defense Solutions facilities. International law enforcement coordinating response. The hotel's power fluctuated one final time, but now it carried an air of finality. The trap hadn't just been sprung, it had been completely sprung, leaving no aspect of their operation untouched. "You built something impressive," Rose acknowledged, watching their corporate empire crumble. "A sophisticated system for moving weapons and technology without detection. But you forgot the most important lesson from my Shadow Rider days." "Which is?" Sterling asked, his voice hollow. "True power isn't about control or force. It's about understanding that every community, no matter how small, has its own kind of strength. You just have to give people a reason to stand together, to protect what matters most. Through her network of observers, Rose watched the final pieces falling into place. Advanced Defense Solutions' corporate response had become the perfect demonstration of their own corruption, documented in real time by the very systems they'd built to maintain control. The Shadow Riders' greatest victory wasn't in defeating their enemies through force, but in showing communities everywhere that resistance was possible, that ordinary people working together with patience and determination could stand up to even the most powerful corporate interests. And as federal teams moved in to secure the final elements of Sterling's operation, Rose Blackwood, former Outlaw Queen turned guardian of small-town justice, allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The candlemaker's shop would remain open, crafting not just beautiful lights for homes, but beacons of hope for communities everywhere. The room fell silent, the weight of their failure pressing down on Bishop, Sterling, and the rest of the Advanced Defense Solutions team. They were broken physically and mentally as the digital walls they had so carefully erected crumbled under the weight of the very systems they had designed. Rose leaned back in her chair, still watching the technical displays as their systems continued to collapse. The power was flickering in the hotel, a reminder that their game was all but finished. "There's no way out now," Bishop said, his voice devoid of its earlier certainty. "No way to salvage this. No way to deny it." Rose's eyes flicked to him, her expression softening for the first time during the confrontation. "No," she agreed quietly. "This isn't about saving face anymore. It's about acknowledging what you've done." "How many people did you manipulate?" Sterling asked, his voice filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "How many lives did you destroy for this? All the families, the businesses, the lives we turned into pawns." Rose's gaze hardened, but she didn't flinch. "You were the ones doing the manipulating, Sterling. You just never thought someone might do the same to you. I told you, it was never about fighting you with force. It was about fighting you with something you couldn't control, the people. And when enough of them come together, you can't stop it." The corporate team had been masters of deception, operating in the shadows, weaving webs of control. But they never realized the depths of their own vulnerability, the belief that power came only from dominance, from top-down hierarchy. They had never considered that the most potent force in the world might come from the ground up, built from trust, shared values, and community. "Your game is over," Rose continued, watching them squirm. "Your empire is crumbling, and you won't get to burn down the rest of the world with it." Bishop opened his mouth, but no words came out. His phone buzzed again, the final nail in the coffin. Federal authorities have initiated full-scale operations to seize all Advanced Defense Solutions assets, pending international arrest warrants for key personnel. Cease all operations immediately. Outside, the streets were no longer filled with the frantic movements of an unsuspecting population. The civilians, each one of them unknowingly complicit in the takedown, were now witnesses to the dismantling of a system built on exploitation. They weren't just passive bystanders anymore. They had actively participated in bringing down an empire. "I have nothing left to say," Bishop muttered. "You've taken it all." Rose stood up, her silhouette framed against the chaotic scenes playing out outside the window. "Maybe that's the point," she said, her voice low but resolute. "When you strip away all the false narratives, all the lies, all that's left is the truth. And when people see the truth, they'll stand together, no matter how many threats you throw at them, no matter how much money or power you control." Harrison's voice came through her earpiece again, quieter now. "The final evidence has been locked. Your systems are sealed, and the world is starting to connect the dots." Rose smiled to herself. "We did it," she whispered. The Shadow Riders had gone from a loose-knit group of outlaws, always one step ahead of the law, to an underground movement of conscience, a network that had pulled off the ultimate heist, not of money or technology, but of power. The kind of power that couldn't be bought or manipulated. The team was done. Advanced Defense Solutions had lost, and it was only a matter of time before the world knew the truth. "Now," Rose said, turning back to the remaining faces in the room, "we rebuild. We don't let the cycle repeat. We will make sure this never happens again." She took a long breath and glanced outside once more, watching as the final remnants of their dominance were reduced to chaos. "And this time," she added, her voice quieter, "we protect the people who are willing to fight for what's right." Her phone buzzed. It was a simple text, one that made her smile for the first time in hours. The candlemaker's shop just opened a new branch in Rockport. "We're on our way." Rose chuckled softly, the weight of the world no longer pressing down on her. The work was far from over, but it had already begun. And as long as communities like Millbrook Falls remained, she knew the light of resistance would never go out. Rose took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what had been accomplished settled in. The empire of Advanced Defense Solutions was crumbling, but there was still so much to do. The fight was never truly over. Even as their final infrastructure began to fail, she knew the hard part was yet to come. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't just a text. It was a news alert. Breaking. Advanced Defense Solutions implicated in international arms deals and covert surveillance operations. Federal task forces now involved in global investigation. Executives under scrutiny. She read it and put the phone down with a sigh. This is just the beginning, she thought. The immediate victory was hers, but the ripple effects would stretch far beyond Millbrook Falls. What she had set in motion was a wave of truth that would cleanse the system. Rose turned back to Bishop and Sterling, who had still not moved, sitting frozen in disbelief. The realization that their world, their empire, had been undone not by superior technology or military might, but by the very people they had sought to control, was sinking in. Their faces were drained of color, their shoulders slumped in defeat. "We've been exposed," Sterling muttered, as if trying to convince himself. "But we can still fight this. We can still fight back." Rose tilted her head slightly, a wisp of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "It's not about fighting back anymore. You can't win a fight that's already over." Her eyes flicked to the screens, watching as their secure networks faltered. More alerts popped up, corporate executives turning on each other, CEOs resigning, law firms and politicians trying desperately to distance themselves from the fallout. The web of connections that had once seemed so impenetrable was now unraveling, piece by piece, and it wasn't just happening in Millbrook Falls. It was happening everywhere. She could see it now, smaller towns, cities, even entire regions waking up to the truth. The network they had worked so carefully to create had only made the world more vulnerable to the very people they had underestimated. The community's power wasn't just about resistance. It was about understanding, about sharing knowledge and support, and finding strength in the collective. "The truth's out now," she said, "and when the people know the truth, there's no undoing it." Bishop stood, looking for something, anything to hold on to. His hand reached for his phone again, but it was dead, one of many systems failing. He slammed it down on the table in frustration. "You've won, but you don't understand. There's still the prototype, the research, the technology. You think you can just let it go to waste?" "I'm not letting anything go to waste," Rose answered calmly, her gaze steady. "The technology, the research, everything you've stolen, it's already out there, being reviewed by the people who matter. They'll decide what to do with it, not you." Her voice softened. "The world doesn't need more weapons. It needs more solutions, more communities standing together, like Millbrook Falls. Not controlled by fear, not held hostage by power. You never understood that, But now you'll have no choice but to watch as it unfolds. Sterling looked like he might say something else, but the words caught in his throat. The realization that they had been outplayed, outsmarted, and exposed by a system they thought they could control was too much for him. He just stared at Rose, finally understanding the depth of her plan. Harrison's voice cut through the tension once more. We're getting movement from the authorities, local and federal teams coordinating now. The media's starting to pick up on the fallout too. This is going global. Rose's lips tightened as she nodded. The fight was over for now, but the struggle to truly shift the balance of power was only beginning. This victory was important, yes, but it was only a battle in a much larger war. Advanced defense solutions was down, but there were others like it out there, hidden behind facades of legitimacy, using the same systems of control to manipulate people's lives, and those systems were crumbling. But in the midst of it all, there was one thing Rose had come to realize: trust. It wasn't just a word, it was a bond. Communities had shown her that they could rise up, not because they were told to, but because they believed in something greater than themselves. They believed in each other. We need to keep going, Rose said, as the final pieces of the operation fell into place. The world's starting to see what we've uncovered, but it's going to take more than just this town, more than just a single network. We need to show people everywhere what they're capable of when they stand together. No more fear, no more lies, just the truth and the courage to build something better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.